Welcome, everyone. I see attendees joining. We will get started in just 1 minute, waiting for critical mass. Okay, can you all hear me now? Perfect. I was trying to unmute myself and the Zoom gods for not allowing me to do it. Welcome, everybody. Really excited to have you here. I'm Cass Madison. I'm VP of Partnerships at the Tech Talent Project. Have a couple teammates with you here today, Jai Rogers and Georgia Gleason and Angie Kidarte, who will provide logistical support throughout the event. One quick note, I think your event invite says this is an hour and a half. We actually have an hour programming for you today. So you get an unexpected half an hour back, which I hope is valuable to you. But we are really excited for today's event. We have a couple amazing speakers with us today. We have Sherika Ekpo and Sarah Hall. So Sherika has deep leadership experience in talent, hiring, and career coaching in both the government and private sectors. She's going to share some wisdom with you for the first half of today's event. And then Sarah Hall, who's Digital Services Director of the City of Philadelphia, will share some of the great work they've been doing. And I will do more complete introductions of both of them in a moment. But the important thing I want to say here is that today's event is a bit of a preview to a larger event you've either been invited to or registered for on July 13th. It's our Tech2Gov forum and job fair supporting the southern region of the country. Really excited to see you all there. And that event too will feature some great programming, which I'll share a little bit more about later. And you'll also have the ability to connect directly with 7 state and city governments, as well as 3 federal agencies who are seeking to hire technology talent right now. And the goal of both today's event and that event in July is not only to obviously connect you with opportunities to serve in government should the timing and opportunity be right, but also to help you understand how you can positively impact people's lives through government service. A few quick logistics before we get started. The first portion of today's event with Sherika will be a fireside chat style. So I'm going to ask some questions to kick things off, but really hoping for this to be a conversation. So please put questions as you have them in the chat, and I'll make sure to field them to Sherika. For the second half of the event, I'll turn it over completely to Sarah Hall, and she's going to share some great work, share her screen, all those good things, and you'll be able to ask questions of her as well. So let's jump right into our fireside chat, and I want to introduce Sherika. So Sherika is a Chief Human Resources Executive, Board Director, author, speaker, and member of the Forbes HR Council. She's also a key advisor to the Tech Talent Project and takes many phone calls for me with questions. So really appreciate Sherika's support in this work. She's a passionate leader with global human resource leadership experience and a senior advisor to C-suite executives. She has a demonstrated ability to design and execute industry-leading people programs, talent management strategies, and workplace diversity initiatives. She's a skilled facilitator and trusted advisor who provides subject matter expertise using evidence-based practice to drive results. She's spent time in government, which she'll tell you all about in a few different places in leadership. And so we're really excited, Sherika, to dive in with you. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your journey into public service? What inspired you to join? And I think you started at U.S. Customs and Enforcement Agency. So tell us about your journey.
Yes. Well, first, I just want to thank you all for hosting such a wonderful event. I read some of the comments and, someone said, this is my first attempt to look at government. So welcome to everyone who is considering either federal, state, or local government. It is a pleasure to have you. We need your talent. So government has always been something that's been on my mind, primarily because I am from Washington, D.C., born and raised. And if you know anything about D.C., the federal government is our industry, right? So in addition to that, both my father and my uncle served in the U.S. Army. And I've always wanted to find ways to, follow their footsteps and serve as well. But I'm not the traditional military type of woman, right? So had to find other ways. But for those of you who have tried to get into the government before, it's not a simple task. It is not just you submit your resume, you press a button and you can get in. And so I had to be strategic about how I entered the federal government. And so for me, I entered as an intern. And in fact, I entered as an MBA intern. So I went to Howard University undergrad and studied business, then started my career in the financial industry at JP Morgan Chase, and quickly realized after almost 5 years that, I would need to get some additional education and I wanted to have more impact. I was just doing one part of one thing and really couldn't see how my work impacted the greater good. And so when I went back to school full time, I remember exploring with my career coach some career opportunities. And government came up primarily because I went to the University of Maryland, College Park, and DC is in our backyard. But it wasn't like at the forefront of, the opportunities. It was consulting was on the table. People said, go back into finance, like do all these different things. But I wanted to find a way to give back and to actually get into service. And so I joined Department of Homeland Security, which is a huge agency. And wow, I joined that in 2009, like I said, as an MBA intern. And at that time, I was trying to find my way because what I couldn't understand is how my skill sets would transfer from the bank to government. I was really trying to make that connection. So what I did was I went and worked for the CFO. That only made sense. Because I know finance and I know numbers, I went to use the new skills that I had gained from my MBA, which was really around human capital management, to support the CFO at the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. And so I married those two together. So for those of you who are on the call and you have like some very specific skills today, just think about the industries that you're in today. Think about the skills you have, but just think about how they translate or how you can leverage them in a different way. And sometimes that takes help from folks like us at the Tech Talent Project. And other times you can get that kind of support from a mentor. But going in as an intern gave me a couple of different opportunities. One, it gave me an opportunity to go into, at that time, a career ladder program, which they had for emerging talent, primarily because there is an aging workforce in our state, local, and federal governments. And so they're always looking for strong talent, people that they can grow into leaders. And so I was able to get into a leadership development program that I stayed at for within DHS for 5 years. And then the second piece that I would want to highlight is really the ability to learn from those who had come before me. And so there's some amazing talent at the state, local, and federal level, people who've been on the job for years, and they're just really hungry to find talent to kind of pass their skill sets off to. And I'm really thankful that I joined ICE back in 2009.
Thanks, Sherika. And then can you tell us a little bit about your journey from there? You spent time at United States Digital Service as well, which folks on the call might not know much about. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey, and in that, tell us what USDS is and what your vantage point was there?
Sure. So in 2009, I joined Homeland Security, as I mentioned, and spent 5 years there as what we call a management and program analyst. And that's a pretty broad series. But in this capacity, I was working in the HR space and what we called workforce management. So managing student programs, managing recruiting initiatives, and managing all things human capital for the CFO of that agency. From there, after 5 years, I went on to become the director of talent acquisition for another agency that was relatively new in its time, which is called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And at that time, President Obama and then Senator Warren had come together to create an agency that would protect the American people from predatory lending and predatory banking practices that quite naturally led to the financial crisis back in the 2010 era. And so working at the CFPB was like a game changer for me because it was a small agency. You have to think about some of the larger agencies that we see at the state and local level. They've been there for a long time. When I joined CFPB, it had only begun 3 years prior. And so I was a part of that group that was building human capital policy, that was building process to really grow the agency and scale it in a meaningful way. And that really drew me in and kept me at CFPB for 3 years, right? And so there I was able to go on from being the director of talent acquisition to work for the director of the agency. And I was pulled up to his office to run some operations to run operations for the agency with our chief of staff. And that position then led me to the United States Digital Service. And might I say, all of these positions were shared with me through what we call details or temporary assignments, where you're in a job and there may be an open requisition or a need at another agency. And if the timing is right, if your manager has the budget and the support, you can go to another agency and do some work for that agency and learn on the job. I think that's one of the greatest benefits of working for the federal government, quite honestly, in the state and local government, is this opportunity to kind of learn on the job and do all of these different things. But I went on to USDS, and the United States Digital Service is a technology agency that was founded again by President Obama's technology initiatives alongside the Office of Management and Budget. And that whole goal was to really scale technology across government. One of the things that was very apparent while in office at that time was that there was a need for technology, and we had a number of contractors who would do a lot of this technology work. And yet the work seemed ongoing forever and ever and ever and ever. And one of the main projects that the USDS was able to stand up and do very well was healthcare.gov. So I don't know if you all remember, and the story is escaping me too, Cass, but listen, do you remember the year? Yeah,
it would have been like I think it was supposed to launch in like October of 2013, somewhere around there. And obviously, nothing worked.
Nothing worked. So President Obama had this great healthcare initiative, and he says, look, we're going to have healthcare for all. We want everybody to use it. It's going to be this universal service. And we brought in a ton of contractors across government to make this work. It was supposed to launch in October of 2013, and they pressed go and nothing happened. December, go, nothing happened. February, go, and nothing happened. So essentially, we got tired of that. And there was a meeting of the minds where folks said, look, is this a problem that we can solve? The answer, of course, is yes, but do we have the right talent to do it? Right. And so I think that's when there was a meeting of the minds to say, listen, there are tons of technological platforms that are coming out that are changing the way we do business, i.e. Twitter, i.e. Facebook, and the like. And we need to go to the Valley, go to Silicon Valley, and see if we can recruit some of that talent to help us solve some of the most pressing issues in government. And USDS was founded on just that. They packed up, went across country, did a couple of presentations to people, sold them on the opportunity, the scale, and the impact of work in the government, actually tricked people and told them that they would only come to work for a couple of months. Hey, come work with us for 90 days. Come work with us, for 4 months. And people ended up staying for 2, 3, even 4 years. And the reason they stayed is because of the impact that they had and their ability to actually see their work impact millions and millions of Americans at a time. Now, let me tell you, I've worked at Google, I've worked at Anaplan, I've worked at all the places in the Bay Area, and I've also worked in the government. And the work is equally hard, regardless if you're in the private or public industry. But the one thing that's the differentiating factor is impact and scale. When I was in the federal government, which I spent 10 years in, the impact that I had on Americans while at DHS or while supporting the VA was unmatched. And when I think about being able to see my work show up in day-to-day life and living, and being able to point to some work that our team has done and tell my grandparents or my parents, hey, our team helped with that, that's very rewarding, because as you all know, it is hard sometimes as you're talking to your relatives to explain what you do on a day-to-day basis. My parents still don't know what I do today, right? But being able to point to some work that I did in government was really cool.
Thank you, Sherika. Is there a story that sticks out at you of the work you were doing, and when you like had a moment where you're like, wow, the human impact of this work is really apparent?
So one of the benefits at working at USDS is it's a small but mighty group. So when I was there were probably about 200 people at this agency total, right? Which is a contrast to ICE, because when I was at ICE, there were like 20,000. Okay, so just the juxtaposition of that is large. But we would have weekly meetings where people would go around the room and kind of give updates on some of their projects. And one of the projects that I think that stands out to me is a project that they were working on with the Social Security Administration. And this is going to sound very elementary, but I want you all to imagine this. Imagine you go and apply for your Social Security benefits, right? You've worked your entire life, you're now 65, and you want to go and retire and make sure that you have a monthly income that can support your lifestyle. And you go to the office, you stand in line for 2 hours, you complete paperwork that is on triplicate paper. And we might be too young to remember this, but the triplicate paper used to have like 3 different layers to it, right? The white layer, the yellow layer, and then the pink layer. You would complete the document with a ballpoint pen. And then afterwards you would take a copy for yourself, and then they would take the other copy and put it in a tray for someone to process. Well, I spent 2 years at USDS, and while there, they took these paper documents and made them all fillable PDFs. It sounds elementary, but when you think about the amount of time that is saved from doing something on paper versus submitting it electronically, to the number of people that can get the document who need it, to the automated updates that come to the applicant in real time, to the processing center being able to expedite something because it no longer has to go through US mail, it is mind-blowing. So there were countless stories that I would hear and be a part of while at USDS that sound small, but had massive impact over millions that really kept me coming back for more.
Oh, I love that story. Thank you, Sherika. And I think it's just like such a good illustration of how most of the time the tech is actually not the most complex piece. It's the people and it's the processes that need to be changed. And seemingly little or not complex tech changes can have such a big impact on people's lives. So I see lots of questions in the chat too about like how you can get hired and where you can get hired, and just know that it can feel overwhelming at first. If this is your first time joining a conversation like this, the Tech Talent Project and others like Sherika, like we're here to support you in your journey to service, and you're probably not going to get every question answered today, but there's lots of resources, programming, time and energy that we put into helping you navigate what's next. So think of this as day one of a journey that we're excited to support you in. One thing I want to ask before we get into some of the other questions is, some people in this audience might say, okay, I want to make a career pivot. Like I've been wanting to go into government now. I want to go into government. I want this to be my career. For other folks, it's, hey, I have this career in the private sector. I want to keep doing my thing in the private sector, but this feels like a good moment where maybe I want to come in for a couple of years and try it out and have an impact. And I want to go back into the private sector. Do you have any words of wisdom on how to help people think about how government service fits into the arc of their career, especially if maybe they want to do it for a little bit and they want to go back to the private sector? Like, how should people think about it? What are the, how does it fit into the puzzle, or how should people think about it as they're figuring out how it fits into their career arc?
So I think there are different entry points, right? And while I wasn't exactly entry level when I joined, I did come in at a more moderate level because I had only worked for about 4 years or so. One of the things that, I like to tell people is if you come in with, I would say, 3 to 5 years of experience, right? Like that's still relatively entry level compared to those who have been working for 25 years, right? Because that's the workforce at the state, local, and federal level. There are several opportunities for you. It's just about finding the right one. So if you are, let's take emerging talent for instance. If you're a recent graduate with 3 to 5 years of experience, I think about what you've already done and trying to think about the skills that you have, that the general skills that can be applied to wherever it is that you want to go. In this case, we're talking about tech talent. And there's a host of opportunities and learning opportunities quite naturally about cybersecurity, about AI specialists, about software engineers, right? And so about engineering. And so when I think about where you are from an emerging talent perspective, the world is your oyster because you can come in at a level where you are a part of a program where you are trained to understand the government way and really apply yourself for a long-term career. If you have worked for 5 to 10 years and now you are thinking about doing a pivot, that is okay too. But you have to think about how to position yourself to be the most marketable and to have the greatest outcome. So I often tell people to look at agencies that align with your skill set and your desire, right? So for instance, I told you I was in finance before. Immigration and Customs Enforcement does, Border Patrol, they actually do federal building protection. They do all these law enforcement like duties. I had no experience in that, but instead I took my financial experience and applied it to the CFO's office. And so I think the same process applies if you're trying to pivot. It's really looking at your skill set and identifying those key agencies, and then also trying to see if there are some key, and I don't want to be too technical in my language, key job series or positions where there are direct hiring authorities that will allow you to almost bypass the traditional hiring process, if that makes sense. That's how I entered as an intern, right? I know that there are tons of student programs. So if you are even in school part-time, looking at a student option is a great option. When we're talking about technical talent, when we're talking about contracting talent, those types of job series have programs that will allow on-the-job hiring or a more concise or streamlined hiring process. So you want to look at that. And then finally, if you are more so at the end of your career where you're saying, hey, I've been in industry for 20 to 25 years and now I want to come and serve in leadership, think about what position you left in, and then start looking at some of the more senior GS 14, 15, and senior executive service positions. And also consider what we call preparatory programs for those senior leadership positions that are offered through the Office of Personnel Management and the General Services Administration, because there are senior leadership development programs that will train you to actually demonstrate the qualifications and the skills needed to apply for those more senior GS 14, 15, and SES positions.
Thanks, Sherika. And then options like United States Digital Service or Presidential Innovation Fellows, these things, I see some questions about this in the chat. They don't, you don't apply to them through USA Jobs. They have their own dedicated website. And so we have put together a hiring guide that Angie has dropped into the chat, which should answer a bunch of questions. Following the July 13th event, we'll also likely have some follow-up events that dig in deeper on like how to write government resumes and like what are the different hiring options. So again, I know it can feel confusing to try to figure out what the right entry point is for you. So think of today as a conversation starter, and we'll go deeper and make sure that we answer your questions in the coming weeks and months. The question, I think one of the questions came up in here around compensation and how people think about that.
Okay, that's always a question that comes up in almost every conversation. And I will just tell you this. I started this with joining the government because I wanted to serve. The financial compensation is kind of like extra, right? Like there are a couple of things that I want to say about compensation. Number one, depending on if you're at the local, state, or federal level, the compensation is different. the compensation may be higher than you think it is, quite naturally. But I don't know that people actually look at the right levels and the right positions when they are considering federal service. So what I would tell you to do is to take a look at realistically the number of years of experience that you have and how that aligns with the open positions that are available. But think about the impact that you'll have on the work, because that's really where service comes in. If you're looking for the highest paying job, this is not it. I can promise you that you can probably get a higher paying job in the private industry, but I don't know that you'll find a job that will give you this personal satisfaction and the impact that you have at the state, local, and federal level. But in terms of what I did personally, I started my career in the private industry, and then I worked for 10 years in the government. Now, I have 3 children, so I'm very clear about where I needed to be. My oldest daughter was going to college. And so for me, I took the opportunity when I got the call from Google to join Google as also an opportunity for me to think about how to build this cushion for my daughter who was going off to college. But that was a personal decision. I felt like all the stars aligned and it just worked out for me that way. But what I know without a shadow of a doubt is I'll be back to the government because I miss the impact that I have. I miss the people that I work with. I miss the opportunity to, share with my family members and my loved ones what I'm doing and how it's impacting the greater good. So this is not the highest paying work, but it is by far the most satisfying work that I've done.
Thanks, Sherika. And then please continue to put your questions in the chat, even if they feel more specific than what we're covering here. It's good for us to collect them so that we can figure out what is the best follow-up conversation and information and resources and events to put together for you all as you prepare for the July 13th event, and then figure out what to do on the other side of it after you have conversations with some of the government agencies. So the last question I want to ask you, Sherika, before we transition is, like, you have this view into what's going on in the tech marketplace right now. Like, there's obviously been a lot of disruption. The job market is changing. Everyone's talking about AI and the impact it's going to have. You have folks in government who are saying, oh, we want to use some of that technology too. Like, just lots of things are changing. And so I'm curious from your perspective, like, if someone's sitting in the audience saying, well, I want to join government, but like, why now? What is the unique opportunity in this moment, or what's the call to action for joining government now? Why does it fit in?
Well, there's no surprise that the economy, specifically for tech companies, has been less than ideal over the last 12 to 18 months. And I myself transitioned out of the tech industry into a more full-time consulting role for myself during that time. What I think is there is a unique opportunity for a couple of things. The first is to get in on the ground level in the federal, local, and state space. I started this conversation by talking about how, when I joined, there was an aging workforce. That has not changed. Right now, there are 5 generations in the workforce, and there's a lot of knowledge transfer that has to happen. But yet and still, we don't have the technical talent in-house to do that. And so what I know for sure is there are several agencies looking for cybersecurity experts, right? Like, there's always a threat. We have to find ways to safeguard our government systems and our data. So we're always looking for cybersecurity specialists. Software developers and engineers, like, listen, if you know Java, Python, C++, like, there is a role for you. If you're a UX designer, right? And you can think about how to create more user-friendly, accessible digital services for citizens. That is a space where the government is really, really trying to learn and grow, right? So you think about user journeys and stories and testing. We need you, right? Cloud computing experts. Things are now no longer sitting on servers. They're literally sitting on the cloud, but we need those cloud experts. And many of these people, these roles that I just explained to you in the tech industry, most recently have been laid off. Like, there are a number of people that have been laid off. There are a number of people who are rethinking their path and their career after COVID, with this now remote work strategy, right? Somebody asked in the chat, well, what does federal service look like outside of DC? It is abundant. right? The pandemic has changed things significantly. So what I will tell you is this hybrid work environment that we now find ourselves in really allows us to really take advantage of the opportunities that were once not at our fingertips because we didn't live in the same city or we didn't live at the in the state capital. So I really, encourage you all to take a look, consider other opportunities that you hadn't thought of before, because there is something for everyone.
Thank you so much, Sherika. Okay, so let's transition to the second half of today's event. But thank you for putting all the questions in. We'll put our heads together again on how to get you more information following this event. So I want to turn it over to Sarah Hall. Sarah is a user experience professional with experience working in health, public, and private sectors. Currently, she's Director of Digital Services with the City of Philadelphia's Office of Innovation and Technology, where she oversees cross-functional teams of content, user experience, and technology professionals. Though in collaboration with software engineers, the teams create consistent, accessible, and high-quality digital experiences for the residents of Philadelphia. Additionally, Sarah is an adjunct professor teaching UX in civic tech at the Tyler School of Art and Architecture at Temple. So as a professor, she's also bringing her in-depth knowledge of UX into practice in the classroom. Really excited to have Sarah here to share about the great work that's happening in Philadelphia. Hand it over to you, Sarah. Please, again, put questions in the chat as you have them, because we'll have a little bit of time after Sarah does her thing to answer some questions. I'm going to go on mute now, but Jai from our team, just know I can't unmute myself. So at the end, we'll keep an eye and help me jump back in when Sarah's done. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully seamlessly. I think got it. Share. All right. I just need to bring the chat back up. Okay. Everyone can see my screen. Great. Okay. Wonderful. So thank you, Cass. I think the kind of fireside chat with Sherika was a great intro into my work, because I work with designers and developers in the city of Philadelphia. So this talk is going to be a little bit about leveraging the design and development for local government impact. So as Cass mentioned, I'm Sarah Hall. My background's in design. I actually have an undergraduate in architecture, so a deep design background. And when I graduated in a recession, so I went straight into industrial design for my master's program, focusing heavily on human-centered design methodologies. So a deep design background, and I worked in healthcare because I really wanted to make impact in people's lives. I thought that healthcare was the only way to do that. And then one day I had my former boss reach out to me on Slack and said, "Hey, would you ever be interested in, working for government?" And I didn't even think of it. So I applied for this role. It was product manager of Phila.gov. And it was really something I was interested because I learned that I could make a change in people's lives. And what that meant for me was being able to start a product team with, at the time, had one designer, one developer, and myself, who had a background in UX. And we kind of partnered with the content strategy team to build out the Phila.gov website. We got $1.5 million and really pushed to move the site from alpha.phila.gov to beta.phila.gov to phila.gov. So the first 2 years of my career at the city were really hyper-focused on phila.gov. And then I was the UX practice lead, UX being user experience. There hadn't really been a dedicated UX team. There are UX designers throughout the city at different points, but there wasn't a team that was dedicated. And then I really advocated for becoming the director of UX. And in 2022 of March, I was moved into the director of digital services. I think one of the really cool things that I've been able to do is advance my career here. I don't think I would be able to move through these kind of roles in anywhere else, but I really was able to connect with the executive leadership in the city to talk about what visioning looked like for the city of Philadelphia. So I advocated for the role of user experience in the Office of Innovation and Technology. I advocated for me becoming a director, and then really when digital services, and that's become a little bit more apparent throughout most of government, I advocated for becoming a director of digital services. So I want to speak a little bit about our team. This is our team. Actually, last week, we've been doing a lot of, we only have to go into the office 1 day per pay period, which is 1 day every 2 weeks. But one of the things we've been doing is trying to get together and hang out. This is kind of the software engineering and digital services teams hang out in a local park. Digital services is comprised of user experience. So we have user experience strategists and designers, content strategy, content strategists, writers, and content designers, digital forms, which is a new service we offer to the city, and we just have kind of general technologists working on that team, and then training and documentation, which is something we've been really focusing on in the past year, because what we're finding is that we're building these tools and we need to make sure that folks know how to use them and we have the correct permissions and everything in that realm. And then we always partner with software engineering, which has folks that focus on philo.gov development. Philo.gov is our largest product. And then application development. So there's software engineers, there's front end, back end, and then managers throughout that team as well. So over the past few years, we've really been focusing on bringing work in-house. We started with philo.gov, and we've been building more vendor-built applications into the team. I want to talk about, really emphasize how valuable it is to bring this work in-house. Prior to us kind of existing, most applications and websites were built outside of by vendors. So the typical kind of situation would be a department would put out a request for proposal, they would get submissions, they would get charged, let's say $20,000, and someone would go and create a website. So they might go away for 6 months and they'd come back with this website. And then for every change they wanted to make, it would be, a certain cost. So, and then the maintenance for every other year. So by bringing things in-house, we really are able to partner with our department partners throughout the city. We're able to create a visual language that is not only accessible for our residents and businesses, they start to understand these patterns and they're familiar with, this is the city website. So we've been able to really focus on what this looks like, and it's been really great. So I want to get into, this pre-pandemic. I'm focusing really on our response to COVID-19. So in 2018, we launched philo.gov. We got rid of like the beta prefix and the subdomain, and we launched philo.gov. We named a new CIO. So a lot of times in government, it's hard to move forward if leadership isn't supportive. And I want to say that in 2019, when we had our new CIO named, our leadership was supportive to bring our team into the fold of the Office of Innovation and Technology. So both the UX and content teams moved into this department, and then our philo.gov devs joined software engineering team and OIT. So we're centralized in the city's main tech area now, and the pandemic began. So March 2020, I think it was around March 20th, I want to say, the city shut down. So the staff was put on a 2-week break. One of the things that we realized is that our teams were able to work remotely. We had a pretty light remote work policy in place prior to the pandemic, but other departments throughout the city didn't have this. A lot of folks didn't have laptops. A lot of folks didn't have maybe Wi-Fi access at home. So the city said, most folks can go, stay at home, but take 2 weeks and only essential employees will be working. So myself, my colleague, Jean Adamson, who was the content strategy practice lead at the time, and our software engineering manager, Carissa DeMai, we started working on a response to philo.gov. So philo.gov, like I mentioned, had released, formally in 2018, towards like end of the summer. And the first thing we did was put out this blog post. So this was something we could really stand up quickly. And it talked about the stay-at-home order. We didn't really know how to address this really large, we didn't know how large it was going to be, but we didn't know how to address it either. So as you can see at the top here, there's a banner that says, this is throughout the site. the pandemic hit, and stay at home. And then we were able to quickly stand up a site, which would be the hub for all of the information. So it's phila.gov/COVID. We started sharing that everywhere. And this was using an existing page template we had. So we have, this header image, these secondary navigation, and then all of the information on this page. And apologies for this, screenshots, but I feel like this is the easiest, not always the best way to kind of share things in a live presentation. And then we have this ability to kind of show this more dynamic, donate or volunteer, locate a free food site, or find an urgent care program. And I'll talk a little bit more about these other ancillary supporting things we did later on in the presentation. So as we move forward, the talk was around what is the risk, how many cases. We added this little kind of feature here that showed there's a high risk of transmission. And then we started building out, how do you get tested? How do we locate places? And then how do we make sure that residents and businesses are able to contact us about what's happening? Vaccination, when that began, we once again, replaced the banner. As you can see, we've got some images changing, moving more towards vaccination as to, COVID's just a thing. And then we started talking about doses administered first, second, and then total doses of the vaccination provided. And then as more widespread distribution was happening, we kind of had this phased approach, and you could go on the site, not only find a testing center, sign up to get the vaccine, and then find out when you were able to be vaccinated. So closing out, the site now still exists, still has information, but it's less active. This was a huge hub for a lot of the pandemic. And now it's kind of, how can you help? What are the city services available? What happens when you have a question? It's more focused towards like the tail end of the pandemic, but it still exists so folks have reference. And this is a screenshot from January 2020. One of the big things that I think we've struggled with is how do you disseminate really important information? The executive order, when it went out, it was a PDF. So you would click on a link. We have these things called document pages, and it just shows this PDF, which is really hard to read. As you can see on the right here, it says, whereas the 2019 novel coronavirus. So a lot of information that may not be understandable to folks was shown as the executive order. And one of the things we did, so this is June 2020, this was put out as the city started thinking around how we communicate this to our Philadelphians. And we used a existing guide template to really move that information from this big bulk of text and kind of legalese to something that was more understandable. So here we have, an overview page, and then the lower part of this page has these sections. Each of these sections have corresponding pages, so you can navigate this almost like a book. Not only is it, I think one of the things that I didn't mention, and something that I've learned a lot about, is plain language. My colleague, Jean, really is a huge advocate for plain language. And what that means is not using jargon and writing things in a way that are pretty simple, so everyone can understand. So we started using plain language when she started back in 2017, and have been carrying that on. And it helps people understand information no matter what their literacy level is, but it also allows for easier translation. So we were able to rewrite some of this information in plain language and get it up for folks to easily access. And then moving on from this, and this is a little fuzzy, but this is where kind of we ended after the larger orders were in place, guidance documents for like, what do I do if someone tests positive at work? So this is from our health department. We often would link to other sites if they have information, but really this is baseline guidance on things post, as we're phasing out and coming back into, masking in public, things like that. So this is January 2021. And then the last part here I want to talk about is how we were able to build essential tools. we have this really cool framework. It's called the Finder framework, but it's a binary map-based application. And what departments were able to do for us is, they have a database with locations, and we're able to kind of plug this into this framework and provide a map-based application. And it was really important for us to create something that was easily to access, especially when schools closed. A lot of school children get their food from school. So when schools closed, school children weren't really able to, eat. So that's really important. So we were able to, one, stand up a blog post. I think the easiest thing and the quickest thing for us to do is stand up a blog post, get the information, and then organize and build out this application. So this blog post went up in March, shortly after we shut down, showing where food sites were for school children, seniors, and just folks in general, as we kind of experienced the beginning of the pandemic. And then we were able to use that site to push out these food distribution site finders. So the screenshot, this is a little old, so if you see the text at the top, we were able to translate it into 5 of the most common spoken English languages in Philadelphia, and able to kind of map everything out. You're able to enter your address at the top, and it would hit locate. And then once you searched or selected a certain thing, it would show you, the details here. So it shows the location, who's eligible, what you need to do if you want to do it, and then kind of the pickup details. So we're able to provide this information to folks, really, really quickly and easily. We were able to do that with testing finders as well. So kind of in conclusion, we had this phila.gov site, which we were able to leverage. We're able to share information by kind of repurposing it into a more accessible format, and then building essential tools using the frameworks we had in place. That is actually it for me. Thanks, everyone. I will address some questions if you have any, and I'll stop sharing. All right. So I'm just checking here. All right.
Yeah, please paste questions in the chat if you have them. One question I have for you, Sarah, while waiting for questions, is the digital service model as you've experienced it in Philadelphia. In addition to delivering products that make people's lives better, there's this effort to kind of change the way government thinks about technology delivery. As the person leading the team, how do you think about helping the institution change the way it delivers things?
That's a really good question. I think one of the things that I try to remember is that we are a very small team and we can't do everything. And if we were to do everything, we wouldn't do anything. So I spend a lot of time advocating and finding projects that we are able to do. So projects that we excel at are ones that involve multiple departments, because we have existing relationships with them and we've built trust. Ones that have multiple data integrations, and ones that are public facing, specifically for vulnerable populations, because we've been working with the city of Philadelphia residents and businesses for almost now 10 years, and we really have a good understanding of the needs that Philadelphians have. So we definitely want to do cool and meaningful projects, but we also have a limited size team. We have, between our team and the software engineering team, we're around 25. So we can only run, I want to say, one large application project or 2 large application projects, plus a few phila.gov features if we're building out new.
That's great.
So staying realistic is
yeah,
really
exactly
something that I focus on.
Yeah. And I think this distinction is worth pausing on for folks in the audience as you think about potential entry points into government. So there's going in and working for a federal, state, or local agency and being a part of their core delivery teams. As a technologist, you might be embedded in a centralized IT organization, or you might be working within an organization like a human services agency and be a technologist in there. And then there's these other entry points like digital services teams, at the state, city, or federal level, that are sit outside of the load-bearing agencies and are kind of designed to be a little bit disruptive, a little bit like a sandbox to kind of show people what working differently is like, and where that digital service teams, not every state or local government has a digital services team. Some do, some don't. And they're designed to kind of, again, show people what's possible and how to work differently. The goal over time is that you're bringing the work inside agencies and that agencies are starting to work differently. I think there's benefits and advantages to coming in and working in different places. If you're working in a digital services team, you likely have the advantage of working with other people who understand how to deliver modern technology well. So there's a team of people who all understand that involving users in technology delivery is really important and a core part of doing technology well. If you enter in through an agency, that may or may not be the culture you're entering into. And so you could be like, if you're someone who gets really excited about going into a place and being like the lone evangelist for something and getting people to come along, dropping into an agency might be the right place for you. If you want to start kind of on a team of people with a team of people that really get this, and are trying to move the needle by working on projects with agencies, digital services can be a really good place to start. So there's no perfect answer, but it kind of gives you a feel for what it's like to work in these different places and how you're interacting with people.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what I share with folks is, it really depends on where you're looking. So, I have been speaking with folks throughout the different states and municipalities, and every model's different. At Philadelphia, we kind of were organic, and we really became like, we've been doing digital services for 10-ish years, but we really became digital services in March of last year. So but then some, like at the state level, they just started Code PA, which is a huge, amazing initiative that's backed by the governor, and they kind of run parallel to other teams. So it's really interesting to see at different levels or different places how their structure is.
Great. And I think you have a question there, Sarah, about what are some of the methodologies you find successful when doing product development at the city level?
I think it's really expectation setting and kind of meeting people where they are. So we have really clear statements of work prior to starting work, and we make sure that starts up for the executive level, and there's an understanding that we're not just going to like meet with you once and then come back a year and a half later and give you the product. We are going to have bi-weekly meetings. We're going to need your frontline staff to engage with us so we can understand their existing processes and how we then do change management as we release our new product. So I think that it's really, I 100% think that we are so, I think, successful in what we do now because our content strategy team early on worked hand in hand with department partners, migrating a lot of their content. So we built trust with them early, and we were able to make impact. So I think that kind of led, our relationship with our department partners. They trust us. They like working with us, and they feel heard and seen. And that's something that I would say like people need.
Yeah. A couple other questions in the chat. There's a question about how, whether you need to live in the city or state in order to be a part of a team. What's the rule in Philadelphia, Sarah?
Case by case, and we are, you have to be a resident in the city within 6 months of hire.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty common at the state and local level, that you have to either be in the city. New York City's been the same way, or you have to like live in the state, even if there's a hybrid work environment. In a lot of state and local governments, there is a residency requirement. For some of the federal roles, there has been more flexibility to remote work. And so obviously, like, United States Digital Service, I think post-pandemic has maintained its flexibility. There's other organizations that within federal government that haven't maintained it. So like Presidential Innovation Fellows, I think this year is requiring everyone to be in DC, and agency by agency, it can look a little different. So it's something you want to pay attention to in the job posting. And there's one more question about folks who are considering making the move in a few years. I'm curious, Sarah, if you like now going from not government to government, Are there any key lessons learned or like advice that you would have for folks about that transition and how to think about doing it successfully?
Yeah, I think I think what was helpful for me was, when I came in, there was a shift in like the funding for the specific project. So Phil.gov got $1.5 million right before I started, and they were really trying to push, moving from beta.phil.gov to phil.gov, so a full release of the site. And that meant that my role coming in was supported and I had the resources to do what was needed to be done. I think that I've seen, well, I would say that if I didn't have that support and I didn't have the continued support from leadership, I don't know if we would be as successful. So it's partly like advocating and making sure that people understand the value that you bring to the table, but it also is the people in charge. For instance, before we moved, we were pulled out of the Office of Innovation and Technology back in 2015, 2016, pre me getting in there. And that was because they weren't able to focus on the work they were able to do. But being pulled out of the Office of Innovation and Technology into the Chief Administrative Office of the Chief Administrative Officer, allowed the team to focus and really do phil.gov only. When we moved back in with phil.gov, I wouldn't say done, but the migration completed, us releasing the site, we didn't need to focus 100% on phil.gov, and we were able to touch more of the applications and other digital products being released. We also had a lot of support from the past CIO, Mark Wheeler, and executive leadership. So it's really the kind of like ebb and flow of the time. And I think we're in a really exciting time. We'll have a new mayor in January, and this will allow us to kind of see what digital services has to offer moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. Well, I thank you so much for being here, for sharing your work, for all that you're doing to improve the lives of people in the city of Philadelphia. I'm actually coming to you from very near Philadelphia right now and was born and raised in Pennsylvania. So your work is near and dear to my heart. And I think your work is really inspiring to everyone on the call today. Sherika unfortunately had to drop, but a big thank you to Sherika again for her insights earlier today. Just a couple key pieces of information for you. So just a reminder, there is a hiring playbook that was dropped in the chat. It is federally focused, but there's lots of really important, details in there that I think are also helpful for state and local folks as well. Particularly the pieces on how to write a government resume. Like your resume needs to look really different in most cases when you're applying to a government job than it does in the private sector. And so there's some resources in there to help you, prepare your application appropriately. Really excited again to see you all at the July 13th event. There will be more programming just like this. So our event that day will be kicked off with a keynote talk from Jen Palka, who worked in the Obama White House, helped found Code for America, just released a book, Recoding America. She'll have some really inspiring words to say. We'll have a second keynote from Terry Ricks, who is in leadership and child welfare in the state of Louisiana. And then in between, we're going to have a bunch of demos and speakers and panels and things that share a little bit more about the impact you can have at the federal, state, and local level. So stay tuned for programming that day, as well as, of course, you'll get the chance to talk to government agencies that are actually hiring. And then following that event, we were figuring out some sort of, post-event workshop that can help you understand how to apply for these jobs effectively. And we'll also connect you to a lot of organizations that can help you in your journey. So at the Tech Talent Project, we work really hard to support folks at the leadership level in their journey to service. There's other organizations that are a part of the July 13th event, United States Digital Response, Beck Center for Social Impact and Innovation in Georgetown, and others that help folks at other parts of their career cycle that can help connect you to volunteer opportunities. So the biggest thing I want you to walk away from today is understanding that there's a whole community of support out there for you in navigating this journey, and that there's a big opportunity for impact, and that now's an incredible moment to join. So more to come soon. Thank you again for taking your time to be with us today. Thank you, Sherika. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to the Tech Talent team for supporting logistics. We'll see you all soon.
Take care.